My husband's best friend came out of our bathroom holding abortion medication and said, "I thought you guys were trying for a baby?" I looked up from my laptop where I'd been researching IVF clinics. "We are trying, Zane. What are you talking about?" Beside me, my husband Jasper froze mid-reach for his coffee. Zane held up an orange prescription bottle. "Then why do you have mifepristone?" "This is abortion medication. It terminates pregnancies." I laughed nervously. "That's not mine." "I would never, Jasper. Is this yours?" The silence was deafening. Zane looked between us, realization dawning on his face. "There's only 2 people who live here," I said as Zane started reading the prescription label. "Filled last month and the month before." My stomach dropped. "My miscarriages," I whispered. "I've had 4 miscarriages in 23 months. I stood up slowly, my legs shaking. "You've been poisoning me? You've been killing our babies?" Jasper backed against the counter, his face gray. "It's not what you think." "Then explain why abortion medication is in our house while I'm taking fertility supplements," I said, my voice rising. "While I inject myself with hormones, while I've been blaming my body for failing us. You killed our children." The words came out raw, broken. "Your mother called me defective at Thanksgiving, asked if maybe we should explore other options. Your sister announced her 3rd pregnancy at Christmas, and everyone looked at me with pity." My voice was rising even more. I refused my promotion to reduce stress. I gave up coffee, wine, sushi, even my anxiety medication to increase the odds. Jasper opened his mouth. "The doctor said stress could, don't you dare." I cut him off. "Don't you dare quote the doctors to me." Zane stood frozen. "I did 3 rounds of Clomid that made me so sick I couldn't work. They shot dye through my fallopian tubes. Do you know how much that hurts, Jasper? While you were poisoning me, I was letting doctors put me through hell trying to find out why I couldn't stay pregnant. We named our babies," I continued, tears streaming now. "You remember how we picked them out together? Phoenix, Sage, Indigo, Xavier. I was knitting their baby blankets while you were making sure they'd never need them." Jasper's hands were trembling, reaching out like he was the one who needed comfort. Zane's face suddenly went even whiter than before. "Jasper, is this about Sloan?" Jasper went pale. "Who's Sloan?" I asked. "She's nobody, just someone from work. I saw you leaving work together late last month." Zane cut him off. "You looked like you were more than co-workers." Her hand was on your neck. Jasper's face started visibly crumbling. "When I asked, you said it was a work project. I believed you because I didn't take my best friend for a cheater," Zane continued. "But the way you're shaking right now makes me doubt that." I grabbed Jasper's phone from the counter. "You said she's nobody, so you won't mind me looking." The text with Sloan loaded immediately. Hearts. Kiss emojis. "Can't wait until you're finally free." I scrolled up with shaking hands. "Did the insurance pay out yet?" My blood went cold. "Insurance?" I kept reading. $8,000 this time. Same as the last 3. Perfect. Almost enough for the lawyer and apartment deposit. 1 more should do it. She wants to try again next month. Perfect timing. I read the next one aloud, my voice breaking. "Making her dead babies pay for our future." Jasper's knees buckled. He gripped the counter to stay standing. "You've been collecting money from our dead children." I could barely breathe. "Pregnancy loss insurance through your work." I didn't even know that existed. $8,000 per miscarriage. $32,000. I kept scrolling, finding worse with every swipe. "You texted her from the hospital. While I was miscarrying Indigo," you wrote. "1 more after this and we're free." You held my hand through contractions while planning the next one. "I never meant for it to hurt you," Jasper started. "You didn't mean to hurt me?" I screamed. "The pregnancy tests," I snapped, everything clicking. "You always brought them home, insisted on watching me take them. You knew exactly when I was pregnant so you could start poisoning me. You controlled the timeline of when each baby would die so it would never look suspicious." I threw his phone at him. "You let me believe I was broken. Let your mother suggest you deserved a real woman who could give you children. You even agreed with her. Then said you'd love me anyway, like you were doing me a favor." Zane already had his phone out. "I'm calling the police." Jasper reached for me. "Please, let me explain." "Explain what? How you used our babies for money? How you poisoned me to afford your girlfriend?" I backed away from him. "I used our savings for fertility treatments while you were collecting death benefits." I looked at this man I had loved for 7 years. Every night I prayed for a baby. Every morning I gave myself injections that made me gain 30 pounds. Your response? You said I was less attractive, remember? While you were poisoning me to be with Sloan. Jasper's mouth moved, but no words came out, like even he couldn't find a lie big enough for this. Zane was on the phone with police, giving our address. Phoenix would have been 2 now, I said quietly. Sage would be walking. Indigo would be 3 months old. But to you, they were just transactions. $8,000 each. Sirens in the distance. Jasper stood there, unable to speak. "I wanted to be a mother," I whispered. "And you knew that. You watched me destroy myself trying." The sirens got louder. "They're coming for you," I said. "And I hope Sloan was worth it." I just kept pointing at the prescription bottle on the counter and sobbing. Zane picked up Jasper's phone from where it had landed on the floor and handed it to the officer. The screen was still showing those awful texts about making dead babies pay for their future. The officer's face shifted from confused to horrified as he scrolled through the messages. He pulled out his radio and called for evidence bags and a crime scene team. More sirens were getting closer, and soon paramedics came through the door with their equipment bags. They took one look at me shaking and crying and immediately started checking my vitals. My blood pressure was 180/110 and my pulse was racing at 140. The paramedic said I needed to go to the emergency room right away. She explained that being poisoned repeatedly for almost 2 years could have caused serious internal damage we couldn't see. Zane said he would drive me and helped me stand up. My legs felt like jelly, and I had to lean on him to walk. The officer said detectives would meet us at the hospital to take my statement. Outside, there were 4 police cars with lights flashing. Neighbors were standing on their porches watching. I saw Mrs. Henderson from next door with her hand over her mouth. Zane helped me into his car, and we drove to the hospital in silence, except for my occasional sobs. At the emergency room, they took me straight back when Zane explained about the poisoning. The triage nurse's eyes went wide when she heard about the mifepristone. They put me in a room, and a doctor came in within minutes. I could hear Zane out in the waiting room on his phone. Later he told me he was calling in sick to work and texting our friends about what had happened. He kept saying he should have said something when he first saw Jasper with Sloan. He looked destroyed by guilt every time I saw him between tests. After about 2 hours, a detective arrived at the hospital. Detective Lionel McAllister was a tall man with kind eyes who introduced himself as the lead investigator. He had a laptop and started typing as I told him everything from the beginning, how we'd been trying for a baby for almost 2 years, the 4 miscarriages that destroyed me, the fertility treatments that wiped out our entire savings, finding the prescription bottle that afternoon, the texts about the insurance money, Jasper running when the police arrived. Detective McAllister asked detailed questions about dates, times, and medical records. He gave me his business card with his direct cell phone number. He said they needed my consent to search the house thoroughly. I signed the form immediately. He explained they would be collecting everything from the kitchen and all medications from the house. They'd already put out an alert for Jasper's car and frozen his credit cards and bank accounts. He said Jasper wouldn't get far. After the detective left, a social worker came to my room. She was an older woman with gentle hands who sat down and explained that reproductive coercion was a recognized form of domestic abuse. She gave me pamphlets about emergency protective orders and victim resources. She said what Jasper did constituted attempted murder, fraud, and domestic violence all wrapped into one. She helped me fill out paperwork for an emergency restraining order right there in the hospital bed. The doctor came back with my test results around 9 that night. My liver enzymes were elevated from the repeated poisoning. She said it would take months to understand the full extent of the damage. She prescribed medications to help my liver heal and gave me referrals to specialists. She said I was lucky Zane had found that bottle when he did. Another pregnancy while Jasper was poisoning me could have killed me. They discharged me around 10:30 with a stack of papers and follow-up appointments. Zane drove me to his apartment since the police said our house was a crime scene. I couldn't go back for at least 48 hours while they processed evidence. Zane's apartment was small but clean. He set me up in his guest room with fresh sheets and towels. He made chamomile tea and sat with me while I stared at the wall. Everything felt surreal, like this was happening to someone else. My phone kept buzzing with calls and texts from people who'd heard. I couldn't deal with any of it. At midnight, I called my boss because I knew I couldn't go to work the next day or probably for weeks. She could hear in my voice that something terrible had happened. I just said there was a family emergency and I needed time off. She told me to take whatever time I needed and that HR would send paperwork for family medical leave. I hung up and sat there on Zane's couch staring at nothing until I finally fell asleep around 3 inches the morning. When I woke up a few hours later, my first thought was that maybe it had all been some horrible nightmare, but then I saw the white hospital bracelet still on my wrist from when they'd taken me in for tests. The reality hit me all over again, and I barely made it to Zane's bathroom before I started throwing up. I stayed there on the cold tile floor for almost an hour, dry heaving and crying until there was nothing left. Zane knocked softly and brought me water and a wet washcloth, but I couldn't even look at him. I was so ashamed of falling apart like that. My phone started ringing around 9, and when I saw it was a blocked number I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. The detective's voice was calm and professional as he told me they'd found the prescription bottle at our house and tracked records showing Jasper had been getting refills from 3 different pharmacies using different doctors. He said the insurance company had already opened their own investigation into the fraud and would probably want to speak to me soon. After I hung up, I remembered I had a fertility appointment scheduled for that afternoon, so I called the clinic to cancel. When I started explaining why I couldn't come in, the nurse got very quiet and said she needed to transfer me to someone else. The next person who picked up said she was from their legal department and that they were flagging my file immediately. She said they'd provide all my medical records to support the criminal case and asked if I had a lawyer yet. I hadn't even thought about needing one. Around noon, my phone rang again. This time it was someone named Alicia Mead from my employer's insurance department. Her voice was professional, but I could hear the shock underneath as she asked me to give a recorded statement about the pregnancy loss claims that had been filed. I spent 40 minutes going through each miscarriage, when it happened, how much money had been paid out while she typed everything up. She kept saying things like, "I'm so sorry and this is unbelievable," even though she was trying to stay professional. After that call, I opened my laptop and started going through our bank statements because I needed to see the proof for myself. The deposits were right there, plain as day. $8,000 appearing in our joint account after each miscarriage and then immediately transferred to a separate account that only had Jasper's name on it. The dates matched up perfectly with when I'd lost each baby. I took screenshots of everything and emailed them to myself and to the detective. My phone rang again, and when I saw it was Jasper's mother, I almost didn't answer but then decided to hear what she had to say. She didn't even wait for me to say hello before she started screaming about how I was ruining her son's life with my lies and hysteria. How dare I involve the police in a private family matter? She said I'd always been unstable and this proved it, and that Jasper was better off without me. I hung up on her, but not before I'd recorded the whole call on Zane's phone. I forwarded the recording to the detective and then blocked her number, her husband's number, and Jasper's sister's number too, because I knew they'd all be calling next. 3 days passed in a blur of police interviews and calls with lawyers and insurance investigators. Then an email popped up from an address I didn't recognize, but when I opened it, I knew right away it was from Jasper. He was writing to say it was all a huge misunderstanding and begging me to call off the police before things went too far. He actually had the nerve to claim the medication was to help manage my miscarriages, not cause them, like I was supposed to believe that. He said he had been trying to spare me more pain by ending the pregnancies early when he could tell they weren't viable. Reading his lies made me so sick I had to run to the bathroom again. The next day, I had an appointment with a reproductive specialist the detective had recommended to assess the damage. The doctor went through my whole medical history and explained how repeated exposure to mifepristone could have caused serious damage to my uterus and cervix. She ordered a series of specialized tests and blood work, and warned me that my future fertility might be permanently affected. She said she'd seen cases like this before, but never one involving deliberate poisoning by a spouse. While I was at the doctor's office, Zane was at the police station giving his formal statement about seeing Jasper with Sloane. He showed them photos on his phone from a restaurant where he'd spotted them together last month the night Jasper told me he was at a client dinner. In one photo, you could clearly see Sloane's hand on Jasper's neck, and they were sitting far too close to be just coworkers. Zane also told them how Jasper had lied when asked about it, brushing it off as a work project. The detective called me that afternoon with an update that made everything worse. The forensics team had tested our coffee maker and found mifepristone residue in the water reservoir and filter. They had also tested the vitamin supplements Jasper had been giving me for stress and found the pills had been opened and resealed with the medication mixed inside. The detective said this proved it wasn't isolated incidents, it was deliberate. sustained poisoning over an extended period of time. 3 days later, I was sitting in a waiting room that smelled like vanilla candles and old magazines, my hands wrapped around a paper cup of water that kept shaking. The therapist's door opened, and a woman with gray hair pulled back in a bun called my name. Elise Meredith had an office full of plants and soft chairs that made you sink when you sat down. She listened while I told her everything, starting with the prescription bottle and ending with the coffee maker. When I finished, she leaned forward and said the words I needed to hear. She called it attempted murder, not just betrayal. We spent the rest of the hour building a safety plan with specific steps, changing my locks, getting a new phone number. My hands finally stopped shaking when she wrote down the crisis hotline number and made me promise to call if I ever felt unsafe. The next morning, the detective called and asked me to come to the station. They'd pulled our home security footage from a cloud backup I'd forgotten we even had. The timestamp showed Jasper coming home with pharmacy bags on January 15th, March 3rd, May 20th, and July 8th. Each date was exactly 2 days before I lost a baby. The worst part was watching him on the kitchen camera, carefully adding white powder to my morning smoothie while I was still in bed. He would stir it slowly, wash the spoon, then bring it to me with a kiss on my forehead. The detective had to pause the video when I started throwing up in their trash can. They gave me ginger ale and crackers while explaining they'd found more evidence on Jasper's devices. He'd been using encrypted messaging apps with Sloan and had tried to delete everything after I confronted him. Their tech team was working on recovery, but said it might take weeks to get it all back. The detective wrote down every detail in his notebook while I sat there feeling like my entire life had become evidence. I started looking for apartments that same week because I couldn't sleep in that house anymore. Every showing felt wrong, like I was watching someone else walk through empty rooms and ask about lease terms. The first place was too expensive. The second faced a playground where children were always laughing and screaming. The third had a kitchen that looked exactly like ours, and I had to leave before the agent even finished talking about the dishwasher. I finally found a one-bedroom above a bakery that smelled like bread every morning. The landlord didn't ask questions when I couldn't provide a reference from my current address. 2 weeks after that, the district attorney's office called. Vincent Milligan had a voice like gravel and kept clearing his throat while he explained they were building 2 separate cases, one for poisoning, one for insurance fraud. He said the evidence was strong but warned me the process would take months, possibly longer. They'd need me to testify, to relive everything in front of strangers who would decide whether my pain was real enough for justice. He gave me a victim advocate's number to call if I needed anything. But we both knew what I needed was impossible to get back. The divorce papers arrived the next day. Jasper's lawyer claimed I was having a mental breakdown and fabricating accusations. They wanted control of our assets, arguing I was too unstable to make financial decisions. His lawyer even suggested I needed a psychiatric evaluation before any divorce proceedings could move forward. My hands shook with rage as I read his claims that I was delusional, that I'd imagined everything because of grief. The papers felt heavy, like holding proof that he was still trying to destroy me even from behind bars. I hired Cyrus McQueen that afternoon after calling 6 other lawyers who said my case was too complicated. He cost more than I made in 3 months, but he promised to fight every single lie Jasper was spreading. The first thing he did was file for a protective order and freeze our joint accounts before Jasper could empty them. He had me write down everything I remembered while he took notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, he looked at me over his glasses and said we were going to bury Jasper in court. Work sent FMLA paperwork the following week. My manager called to check in, her voice careful like she was afraid I might break. She said to take all the time I needed, but we both knew my performance review was coming up. The promotion I'd turned down to reduce stress felt like another thing Jasper had stolen from me. I filled out the forms at my new kitchen table, writing family medical emergency in the reason box, because there wasn't a checkbox for husband murdered my babies. 3 weeks into living in my new apartment, I ran into Sloan at the grocery store. She was buying pregnancy tests. The irony made me want to scream, but instead, I pulled out my phone and started recording. She walked right up to me, had the nerve to touch my arm, and said she had no idea what Jasper was doing. Her voice was high and fake sweet as she insisted they were together, but she thought I knew about the affair. She said Jasper told her we had an arrangement, that our marriage was just for show. She kept talking while I recorded, admitted they'd been together for 8 months, said he promised to leave me after the holidays. When she finally noticed my phone, her face went white and she practically ran to her car. The blood test results came back the next day. The doctor called to explain they'd found traces of mifepristone metabolites still in my system 5 weeks after the last poisoning. She said it proved repeated exposure over time that my body had been saturated with the drug. The documentation would be crucial for the criminal case, she said, then asked if I needed a referral for counseling. I almost laughed because I was already seeing Elise twice a week and it still wasn't enough to make sense of any of this. 2 weeks passed in a blur of police interviews and medical tests before I got the call. The detective's voice was flat when he told me they'd pulled Jasper over for a broken taillight 3 states away. He'd been living in his car, hadn't shaved in days, and started crying when they cuffed him. The booking photo they sent me showed someone I barely recognized, hollow eyes, wrinkled and stained clothes. I stared at that photo for an hour, waiting to feel something other than empty. Zane kept asking if I was okay, but I couldn't answer because I genuinely didn't know. The bail hearing happened 3 days later in a courtroom that smelled like old coffee and floor cleaner. Jasper's mother sat in the front row wearing her church dress, shooting daggers at me with her eyes. When the judge set bail at $200,000, she stood up and wrote a check without hesitation. She'd refinanced her house, the bailiff told me later. The judge granted my restraining order, but I knew a piece of paper wouldn't stop Jasper if he truly wanted to hurt me. His mother cornered me in the hallway afterward and hissed that I was destroying her son's life over nothing. I walked away without responding, because what could you say to a woman who thought poisoning babies was nothing? The following week, Elise suggested I try a pregnancy loss support group that met at the community center on Tuesdays. I sat in that circle of plastic chairs for 20 minutes before I could speak. When I finally said the words out loud what Jasper had done, the room went completely silent. One woman started crying. Another reached over and held my hand. They believed me without question, which was more than I could say for most people. After the meeting, 3 of them gave me their phone numbers and said to call anytime. I saved them but couldn't bring myself to reach out just yet. The detective called while I was grocery shopping 4 days later. They'd obtained Sloane's phone records and found hundreds of texts between her and Jasper about the insurance money. She had known everything from the beginning and had helped him plan each poisoning. The prosecutor had offered her a deal to testify against him, and she had taken it immediately. No loyalty among the guilty, apparently. I had to abandon my cart in the cereal aisle and sit in my car for an hour after that call. The next morning, I stopped at my usual coffee shop for the first time since everything happened. A pregnant woman was ordering at the counter, her hand resting on her round belly. My chest tightened and I couldn't breathe. The walls started closing in and my vision went dark at the edges. I stumbled to my car and used the breathing exercises Elise had taught me. Count to 4, breathing in, hold for 4, out for 4. It took 15 minutes before I could drive home. My lawyer Vincent called that afternoon with news that made me want to scream. Jasper was claiming the mifepristone had been prescribed by a doctor for his own medical condition, some rare thing where men supposedly needed it, which was complete nonsense. We spent the next 6 hours going through every medical record I had from the past 3 years. Not a single prescription for that drug existed in my files. Vincent said we'd need to subpoena Jasper's records to prove he was lying. The insurance company called the next day, and Alicia's voice was all business. They were denying all 4 claims Jasper had filed, and demanding repayment of $32,000 plus interest. They were also filing separate criminal charges for insurance fraud. She said they took fraud very seriously and would pursue this to the fullest extent. Good, I thought. Let him face consequences from every direction. Zane drove me back to the house a week later to pack my things. I'd been staying with him since that first night and couldn't put it off any longer. The moment I stepped into the kitchen, my whole body started shaking. This was where he'd poison me every morning, mixing that drug into my prenatal smoothies while kissing my forehead. I threw up in the sink while Zane rubbed my back. We grabbed clothes and important papers and left everything else behind. I couldn't stand being in those rooms where I had been so happy and so blind. My phone started blowing up that night with messages from people I thought were friends. Jasper had been posting on social media claiming I was having a mental breakdown and spreading lies. Some people believed him and sent messages saying I needed help. Others just wanted the gossip and asked for details like this was entertainment. I deleted every social media account I had after reading one post that said I was obviously lying because what husband would do something so evil? The prosecutor brought in a forensic toxicologist the following week to review my case. She spent 3 hours explaining how the poisoning pattern showed careful, deliberate planning. Each dose was calculated to end the pregnancy while keeping me alive, which required specific medical knowledge. The spacing between poisonings was designed to mimic natural miscarriages. She said whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing and how to make it look like bad luck. The prosecutor recorded everything for trial. Then Vincent called to say Jasper's lawyer wanted to meet about a plea deal. I drove to Vincent's office, where the walls were covered in law degrees and photos of him shaking hands with important-looking people. Jasper's lawyer sat across from us with a folder full of papers and started talking about reduced charges if I agreed not to sue for damages. Vincent listened without interrupting, then leaned back in his chair and told the lawyer the evidence was far too strong for us to consider any deal. The lawyer kept pushing and said Jasper would plead to simple assault instead of poisoning. Vincent actually laughed and said the grand jury would never accept that. 3 days after that meeting, I had to attend divorce mediation in a conference room overlooking the city. Jasper sat at the other end of the table, looking thinner than before with dark circles under his eyes. His lawyer started reading from prepared notes about how the marriage assets should be divided. Then Jasper's lawyer said that since I had earned more than Jasper, I should pay him spousal support. My lawyer Cyrus stood up so fast his chair rolled backward and hit the wall. He pulled out tax returns showing I had only earned more during the last 2 years, while Jasper had been the higher earner for 5 years before that. Cyrus also pointed out that Jasper had been stealing from me through insurance fraud, making any claim for support completely absurd. Jasper's lawyer tried to argue, but Cyrus shut him down with case law and precedent until they dropped the request entirely. The following Monday, I went back to work, but only for half days because I couldn't focus on anything. I kept making mistakes on reports I had done hundreds of times before. My supervisor found me crying in the bathroom after I accidentally sent an email to the wrong client list. She told me to take my time and that everyone understood what I was going through. But I knew my career had taken a serious hit. I couldn't concentrate long enough to complete even the simplest tasks. My hands would shake when I tried to type, and I'd lose my train of thought mid-project. A week later, Vincent called to say Sloane had accepted a deal with the prosecution. She gave them everything, including texts where Jasper referred to the babies as financial opportunities and calculated how much each one would bring in. She showed them messages where he planned exactly when to administer the medication based on my cycle. There were emails discussing apartment listings and how they would use the insurance money for deposits and furniture. Sloane even had recordings of phone calls where Jasper laughed about how I blamed myself for the miscarriages. Vincent said her testimony was devastating and would essentially guarantee a conviction. The hardest day came when I had to go to the prosecutor's office to identify evidence. They brought out clear plastic bags containing the baby blankets I had been knitting. The yellow one for Phoenix still had the needles in it where I had stopped mid-row. The green one for Sage was nearly finished except for the border. The purple one for Indigo was just begun, only a few inches of yarn worked through. The blue one for Xavier was complete, and I remembered wrapping it in tissue paper, thinking maybe this time we would finally get to use it. The prosecutor asked me to confirm these were mine, and I could barely speak to say yes. They also had the pregnancy journals I had kept, full of notes about symptoms and hopes for each baby. Seeing all of it labeled as evidence with case numbers made me understand that those babies were never going to be anything more than that evidence in a criminal case. 2 weeks after that, the grand jury met, and Vincent called me that afternoon to say they had indicted Jasper on all charges. He was facing assault with poison, insurance fraud, and domestic violence charges that could mean 20 years in prison. Vincent said it was one of the strongest cases he had ever seen, given all the evidence and Sloane's testimony. But he warned me that trials were unpredictable, and that Jasper's lawyer would try everything to create reasonable doubt. He said we needed to prepare for a long fight and that Jasper might still pursue a plea deal as the trial approached. The following week, I had an appointment with my fertility doctor, who ran a series of tests to assess the damage the medication had caused. She came back with mixed results, some scarring, but not complete infertility. She said I might still be able to have children, but recommended waiting at least a year before trying, to allow my body to heal. She also said the emotional trauma needed time to settle before I would truly be ready to try again. I left her office feeling numb, because I didn't know if I would ever want to try again after everything that had happened. While dealing with all the legal proceedings, I started receiving mail I didn't recognize. Credit card statements for cards I had never opened, with balances in the thousands. I called the companies and they told me the cards were in my name with my social security number. The charges were for jewelry, electronics, and cash advances, totaling $30,000. I took everything to Cyrus, who filed fraud paperwork but said it could take months to resolve and I might have to pay some of it while we fought. He found applications Jasper had forged with my signature and submitted proof to the credit companies, but they moved slowly. Yesterday morning I got to work and found a large flower arrangement on my desk with a note in Jasper's handwriting, begging for forgiveness. Security cameras caught the delivery person but not who had placed the order. I called the police to report the restraining order violation, but they said without direct proof that Jasper had ordered them, they could only issue him a warning. Security walked me to my car after work and said they would watch for any further deliveries. The flowers went straight into the dumpster, but I could still smell them on my hands, even after washing them 5 times. 6 months crawled by before I found myself in my apartment lighting 4 small candles on what would have been Indigo's first birthday. The vanilla scent filled the living room while I sat on the floor and said each name out loud: Phoenix, Sage, Indigo, Xavier. My hands shook setting up the last candle, but I managed to get through singing happy birthday without completely falling apart. The cake I'd bought sat untouched on the coffee table next to 4 tiny wrapped boxes containing baby socks. I couldn't stop myself from buying. I blew out each candle one by one and whispered their names into the smoke. The divorce papers came through 2 weeks later, and my lawyer explained how Jasper's criminal actions meant our prenup applied in full. I got the house, both cars, our savings, and the retirement accounts, while he was left with over $40,000 in legal fees and nothing else. The paperwork showed his signature, shaky and uneven, signed from county jail. I signed my name steady and clear, then went home and changed the locks even though he wasn't getting out anytime soon. 3 months after that, I sat in a cold room at the courthouse waiting to testify before the grand jury. They made me describe each miscarriage in detail while Jasper sat 20 feet away in his orange jumpsuit, watching me. His lawyer kept interrupting to question my memory of dates and times, trying to make me appear confused or dishonest. I pulled out my journal where I had recorded everything and read the entries word for word: the cramping, the bleeding, the emergency room visits, the D&C procedures. When his lawyer asked if maybe the miscarriages were natural, I pointed to the prescription bottle in evidence and asked him to explain why abortion medication had been found inside my prenatal vitamins. The grand jury indicted on all charges within the hour. Elise met me at her office the following week to help write my victim impact statement for sentencing. She had tissues ready and a recorder so I could speak instead of write when my hands got too shaky. I named each baby and described the nursery I had started planning 4 separate times. I talked about the baby clothes still hidden in the closet that I couldn't bring myself to donate. I mentioned the stretch marks on my stomach that proved those pregnancies were real, even though Jasper had tried to erase every trace of them. We practiced reading it together until I could get through it without my voice breaking completely. The plea deal news came through Vincent's office a month later, and I threw my phone across the room when I heard 5 years with possible parole in 3. Vincent explained on speaker that it was technically a good outcome for a poisoning case where the victims never legally drew breath. I screamed that they were real babies to me and hung up on him. The sentencing hearing happened 2 weeks after that in a packed courtroom. I read my statement while Jasper's mother wailed dramatically in the gallery and his sister glared at me from her seat. The judge nodded along and said he understood my pain but had to follow the plea agreement the prosecution had accepted. Jasper stood up and mumbled something about being sorry, but the judge cut him off and told him to save it. I walked out feeling hollow while his family shouted that I'd ruined his life. My lawyer filed the civil suit for emotional distress and battery the same week, warning me it would take years and I'd likely never see a penny from someone serving time. I signed the papers anyway because I wanted it on the record forever what he had done. The insurance company moved faster with their own lawsuit and won $50,000, including penalties and interest that Jasper would owe whenever he got out. Their lawyer called it a clear-cut case of insurance fraud and said they'd garnish any wages he ever earned. Small comfort when my arms stayed empty every night. 6 months into his sentence, I started volunteering with a domestic violence organization, telling my story to rooms full of women who nodded along with recognition in their eyes. Some of them had bruises. Others had invisible wounds like mine from partners who found quiet, calculated ways to control and hurt them. The coordinator said reproductive coercion was far more common than most people realized, and that my story helped others recognize the warning signs. One woman came up to me afterward in tears because her husband had been tampering with her birth control, and she had convinced herself she was going crazy. A full year after that first moment with Zane holding up the prescription bottle, I sat in Elise's office for our monthly session. The panic attacks had gone from daily to roughly once a week, usually triggered by baby commercials or pregnancy announcements on social media. I had gone back to work full-time and even accepted the promotion I had once turned down, throwing myself into long days that kept my mind occupied. My coworkers had stopped walking on eggshells around me, and I could make it through most days without crying in the bathroom. The grocery store baby aisle still sometimes sent me abandoning my cart and rushing for the parking lot, but Elise said that might never fully go away and that was okay. I had started dating again, just coffee meetings that never went very far, because eventually I'd have to explain why I flinched when someone mentioned wanting children someday. The grief hadn't gotten smaller, but I had gotten better at carrying it, like a heavy backpack I'd learned to balance while still moving through each day. Zane started coming over on Thursdays to watch basketball and order Chinese food, but he had stopped trying to fix everything or apologize every 5 minutes the way he did in those first few months. He had set up his own quiet rules texting before coming over, not staying past 10, not bringing up Jasper unless I did first, It helped us find something that felt almost normal again. The prison called one afternoon while I was sorting through medical bills. The voice on the other end told me Jasper had been attacked by another inmate and was in the infirmary with broken ribs and a fractured jaw. I hung up without asking if he was okay and went back to sorting papers. I waited to feel anything, but there was just an empty space where caring used to live. My boss pulled me aside the following week and offered me a transfer to the marketing department in the East Building, where nobody knew my story and I wouldn't have to walk past Jasper's old office every day or see the break room where Sloan used to eat lunch. I packed my desk that Friday and moved everything to a cubicle with a window view of the parking lot instead of the courtyard where we used to have lunch together. Elise eventually convinced me to meet someone for coffee. Just coffee, she said, a man from her book club who knew my situation but still wanted to meet. I lasted 20 minutes before making an excuse about a work emergency, because his cologne reminded me of the aftershave Jasper had worn on our wedding day, and I threw up in the restaurant bathroom before driving home. The lawyer called while I was out planting tomatoes in my new garden bed. The civil suit had settled for $75,000 that I'd probably never collect, but at least there was now a legal document stating that Jasper could never contact me again, even after his release. I bought 4 small trees from the nursery and planted them along the back fence, one for each baby, writing their names on river rocks placed at the base of each trunk. Phoenix got the apple tree, because we had talked about picking apples with our children someday. Sage got the oak for strength. Indigo got the cherry tree for beauty. Xavier got the maple because fall was when we had tried the hardest for him. I watered them every morning before work and pulled weeds on weekends and sometimes sat on the grass between them, reading pregnancy loss books Elise had recommended. A reporter from the state paper left 3 voicemails about doing a feature story on reproductive coercion and insurance fraud. I deleted them all without calling back. I didn't want to become the cautionary tale in someone's Sunday morning reading. The anniversary came on a Tuesday. I took the day off work and sat in my garden with the 4 trees, which were beginning to show new growth, and I realized I had survived something that should have destroyed me completely. I wasn't grateful for discovering a strength I never wanted to need. I wasn't proud of surviving something that never should have happened in the first place, but I was still here, still breathing, still getting up each morning to water 4 trees, still going to work, still sometimes laughing at Zane's terrible jokes during basketball games. The poison Jasper fed me for 2 years hadn't killed me, even though it killed our babies. And some days, that felt like its own kind of victory, even if it was one I never wanted to win.